Welcome to Maya Dynamics Level 2, Week 5. Let's see, I just asked the guys in the live classroom if there are any questions, and apparently there's nothing. But you know the drill, guys. Type them in the chat window, and I'll come back and keep checking. So today, we're going to start talking, we're going to continue talking about fluids, but we're going to start talking about fuel and temperature to start doing things more like fire or, eventually explosions and things like that. I'm going to place in the community. I'm going to find a couple of quick times that I want to show you. So I had them open, but I had to reboot my machine. Here we go. So we get this. Okay, so we're going for this today. Or at least I'm going to give you the tools you need to make this. And I'm going to place this video to the communities in case you need it. If you want to take a look at it with more time. But yeah, this is basically what we're going to go for. So I'm going to keep this open. I also have the same, but with an environment. Just so you can see that these things will cast shadows onto the ground. Something to keep in mind. Okay? But it's the same element, just with a little bit of a background there or something. Just anything, just the ground, just to show you this bit. So I'm going to keep them both in case we need it. So far we've been doing dust, steam, nothing, nothing that involved temperature or even less fuel. So before we dive into the main scene, I have this very simple example that illustrates very clearly the way this works. Okay, so combustions inside the fluid container will happen pretty much as it happened in real life. You will need the equivalent, okay, for your air. So for a combustion to happen, you need fuel, an ignition source, and oxygen. So think of your density as the oxygen, and then you have fuel, and you have a source of heat, an ignition source, and then you have to determine, okay, part of the conditions or the attributes that you're going to be modifying in your simulation are going to deal with how flammable the fuel is going to be, what type of fuel it is, and the mix of air versus fuel that you have in this container. So you can relate to it very quickly in regular terms. Those of you, I don't know you, but when I was a little kid, I used to run around with a box of matches, burning everything I can. I don't know why. I was a bit of a pyromaniac. So you've seen fire many times. You probably started a fire or two here and there. So you get the idea. And as long as you keep in mind that density is important to have it in your simulation, then you're gonna be fine. Okay, so you need to always keep in mind how fast your fuel is burning, what happens when it burns. You emit more, or what do you do, right? So what I'll do to illustrate this is going to be I'm going to create myself just a container. I'm going to give it a little bit of resolution because it's easier just to illustrate the result. You know that I don't like to see those boxes at the bottom there. So gone. And I'm going to draw myself a curve, and that's just I do the curve because it's easier to show you the result, and also you can see now that emission of fluids from a curve is totally valid. I'm going to make myself a little bit of a there, perfect. This curve lives inside my container, so that's perfectly fine. I don't care much for the height of this, so I'll do a 5 because I want to work from the top view anyway. And I'm going to create just a simple piece of geo. Let's make a sphere, and I'm going to place it right at the beginning, somewhere there. Cool. Then if I want to emit fluids from this curve, okay, it's the same procedure as with geometry. You grab the curve, grab your container, go into fluid effects, add editing content, emit from object, and you're going to select, instead of surface, of course, a curve. And this curve is going to emit, in this case, I'm going to use it for emission of density, and I'm going to use it for emission of fuel. No heat, no temperature. Hit apply and close, and you can see the heat, even though it's set to add, the value is set to 0, but I like to turn it off. And I got then an emitter that it has simply fuel and density. So if you hit play, well, I'm going to also get rid of the buoyancy of this container. I don't care. I just want to show you what happens when the fuel burns. So for that, I'm going to go into my, well, first of all, when you start introducing heat and fuel, temperature and fuel into your simulation, you have to activate it onto the content method. Even though the emitter is pumping those values out, the container is not ready to take them yet. So temperature is by default set to off. Make sure that is set to dynamic grid. Same thing for your fuel. That way we have the ability to simulate this. And for this particular example, I don't need buoyancy. Okay, so I'm going to put that to, oops, not that. I don't want to use 0. He's going to use something other than 0. Perfect. So that's that. I'm going to emit a little bit, which is right here. And I'm going to set an initial state. Those of you, I think Dave and Mike, you guys have taken my course before, and you know that I'm not a big fan of initial states, are a pain in the ass. The thing for this example is not a problem. And another thing is that as with the difference for particles, okay, particles, if you create an initial state, to delete initial state takes a few too many clicks. For fluids, it's not that bad. Okay, fluids you could save an initial state because you can very easily clear it. So it's not too big of a deal. So what I'll do in this case is just I want to emit my content and then set an initial state, rewind. Okay, keep it there, and I'm just not going to emit anymore. Okay, so I'm just going to deal with whatever I have in my scene. So I'm going to grab my fluid emitter and set it to no emission of density, no emission of nothing. Okay, nothing is being emitted, not even speed. And then I get the simulation. I'm going to also the dissipation. Okay, I'm going to turn it off. Well, it is off, so perfect. So we have just this. Okay, so it's evolving a little, but okay, it's doing something in here. Perfect. One thing to keep in mind when you're dealing with this new attributes, okay, these new components of a fluid simulation, is the display. Okay, the visualization of these elements is going to be extremely important for your success. So we've been using the display only set to as rendered. Honestly, there hasn't been any reason to change that to anything else. Now there is. Density is visualized at the moment. Now we can see the value of temperature, which is nothing. Makes sense, as I don't have any temperature emitter in here. And the value of fuel, you can see that it's matching my curve. So this is going to be key because at some point we're going to have to deal with these combustions, and we're going to need to see what happens, how much fuel do we have and where is it, how's the temperature dealing with, how's behaving, where's the density and all this thing. You're going to have to constantly keep an eye on those. So it's important that you do this. So we have density and fuel. We don't have any temperature. What I'll use is this sphere as my source of ignition. Okay, we have air. We have a fuel. Now we need to add heat in order to get a reaction. So I'm going to grab my sphere, grab my container, and then emit from that one only temperature. So surface, and I'm going to call this one then no density, only temperature, no fuel, and done. Now if we hit play in here, we're going to get something. Okay, something is starting to happen. Let's visualize what's going on in here. Right now on my container, I am looking at my fuel. If I wanted to look at now my temperature, you can see that it's concentrated in this region. We could open the boundaries just for letting the temperature go out for the example only, but there you go. So we get temperature right on this corner right here, and it's propagating a little bit, but nothing else is happening. So perfect. So like I was saying earlier, now we have all three components to have a reaction. If we look again at our fuel, okay, our fuel is concentrated in this section. So what you're going to be working the most on this type of simulations is going to be down on your content method, contents method. Sorry, we use density and velocity and turbulence up to this point. Now we can open temperature and fuel and keep an eye on those. And I personally think that the most important bit that is going to drive this simulation to success is going to be, it's going to rely a lot on your fuel and the way this fuel is being dealt with. One thing to keep in mind is you don't necessarily need to have a fuel in order to get something that looks like fire. Even the result that I'm giving you here doesn't necessarily have to have a fuel in order for this to happen. And that has to do just because of the nature of fluids and the way that, for example, by dealing, if you go into the shading section, okay, up to this point we never had any oranges and blacks and yellows, okay, simply because our incandescence, which is usually the one that deals with this, is mapped to temperature, as you can see in here. So in order for you to get any colors out of this ramp, you needed to have temperature, and we didn't have that up to this point. That being said, you can see there is no reference to fuel in any of this attributes for shading, so it's not really needed. Now the thing is, the reason you introduce fuel is because it gives you a more natural result in here. But I could easily be emitting density and temperature only and get a result that is similar to what I have on the screen. So I can tell you with property that me and my friends at work, then we use simulations with fuel probably, I don't know, half the time. Sometimes it's not even necessary. And we also sometimes introduce temperature in simulations that don't need to have incandescence for dust. Okay, it's also used because it just moves the density in a different way. So, keep in mind that those components you can live without some of them. But I want to show you everything, of course, so that's why we're doing this. So, going up here into the fuel section, like I said before, you need to specify the properties of this fuel. What kind of fuel? Is it powder? Is it black powder? Is it kerosene? Is it gasoline? What is it? We don't know. So, and the way you determine those properties is not really like a preset that you're going to use, but it's basically how fast this fuel is going to consume. What is the minimum ignition temperature that you need? How hot it needs to be for this thing to catch on fire? And what happens while it's burning? Are we releasing energy? I mean, not energy, sorry. Are we releasing heat or not? And with those three, okay, you will get behavior that will kind of simulate different types of fuel that you could have. The default numbers are right here, okay? So basically the fuel scale, it's just basically an overall scale of everything. So leave it at 1 for now. The reaction speed is important. That's why I'm doing this example here. So the reaction speed at the moment is set to 0.05. And it gives us, keep in mind that we're visualizing fuel, if I'm not mistaken, yep. So what we see here is the fuel reacting. So we go in and run this, and you can see that the fuel, I'm going to give myself some more room to play. All right, so the fuel it's been modified a little, okay? It's disappearing, so meaning it's consuming itself at this ratio, okay? That's the speed of consumption, or the reaction speed, okay? It's doing that. It's taking so far 460, 500 frames, and it takes, let's let it complete. It's going to take about, let's say, 650 frames, so 700 frames, okay? It took to go over the entire amount of fuel. Because I'm not emitting anymore, then you can easily see that that's it, the reaction is over. Let's change the reaction speed to a value of 1, for example. So now you can see that it's a lot faster. Sorry, let me continue playing. It's taking only 120 frames to consume itself. So that's a clear example, okay, clear way to understand how to deal with this kind of fuel, okay? So this could be, I don't know if you guys watch the show, The Mythbusters on Discovery Channel. They love to burn stuff, and I love that show, man. It's fantastic. So if you get a chance, watch a few of those episodes. There's one of them where they're dealing with a myth that deals with a guy, the typical barrel full of black powder, okay, and he's going to the carriage, and he leaves a trail, and you light it on fire, and this, kind of the trail follows along, and then catches with the barrel and blows up. And they spend the whole episode, I think, testing the the reaction speed of different types of fuels. Okay, they use black powder, works in a way. They try it with gasoline, with like a truck with a hole in the myth was something like, okay, there's a truck and the guy's running away, and this guy shoots him from the distance with a gun into the gas tank. The gas starts to spill, and he lights a match, throws it, and the gasoline catches up with the car and blows up. So it's a pretty interesting show, because it has all this, scientific testing, the stuff that we tend to fake with the computer, right? So reaction speed is key to the way that you're going to deal with your simulation. So, very clearly you can see the difference. Okay, so I'm going to put that to a value of 0.1. And you have an air to fuel ratio, which by default is set to 0, meaning that there's no air. Technically, you could dilute this reaction. So, if you think your reaction speed and it's okay, but you want to overall kind of tame this effect a little bit, you could add a bit more air onto the scenario, so dilute the concentration inside. Nothing here for me to play with. I don't really use this because I tend to get a faster result by just modifying the reaction speed. But the ignition temperature is very important. By default, it's set to 0, which means that in this case is that it has as long as there is some sort of temperature, okay, temperature coming into contact with fuel at any ratio is going to be a reaction. Okay, it's considered a reaction, and an ignition takes place. That is very, for us, it's not very good. Okay, we should be using values different than 0. And that's going to give me a more realistic result. Otherwise, everything is burning at the same rate. It doesn't really make any sense. What I would like is eventually to have pockets of fuel accumulating in areas where the temperature is not that hot, and then introduce a source of ignition somehow, either by turbulence on the temperature or anything, just the overall motion of the fluid, and it happens to, temperature happens to touch a pocket of fuel, and then a big reaction will happen in different areas. That gives you a chaotic, more aggressive result, which is what you really want ultimately. So the ignition temperature should be any number other than 0. Okay, let's try, for example, setting a high value. Okay, a value of 2. We have a reaction speed to 0.1, relatively quick. Let's go ahead and rewind. And you can see that my fuel is not consuming itself at all. It's starting to happen a little bit, okay? Slowly starting to happen, and it's only happening in this section right here, but it's taking even longer than before to consume itself. It's because it takes too much temperature to ignite this thing, okay? So this fuel to react is going to have a very hot source to happen here. You could obviously magnify this effect. If your number is high enough and you don't get enough temperature in here, then nothing's going to happen, no reaction. So right now, yep, catching slowly because this sphere is always emitting, so it could accumulate a bit of heat in here. But you can see that definitely it has an effect. I like to use values of, for example, 0.1 is enough. Okay, just something other than 0, like I said, just to get different ranges of combustion. And then as this fuel is burning, right, you have the opportunity to emit more heat, so more temperature. So that is a very very helpful way also to maintain this ignition. If you don't emit anything, okay, so I have a max temperature and a heat release which go hand to hand, these two numbers. The max temperature is the maximum amount of temperature that can get emitted out of this combustion, okay, per voxel. Out of the burning of this fuel, okay, so it cannot go higher than 1, and your heat release, okay, is the amount of temperature that gets emitted on this reaction, is set to 1 as well. Let's say that you say there's no heat release at all, so somehow this is some kind of magical fuel that when it burns, no more heat comes out, it just disappears. Then you hit rewind, okay, and let's go ahead and hit play again, and I'm going to keep my ignition temperature a bit high. So we can eventually get some sort of reaction in here, but as soon as the fuel, okay, starts to go and get disconnected from the source of ignition, from the heat itself, is going to stop burning itself. Okay, it's basically not emitting enough heat to maintain that combustion. Right now it is burning because we have, okay, if we visualize the temperature, well, we do have real temperature here. Let's go back to the fuel. It seems to be burning, okay, but I think it's just escaping from the container. So it might just be, yeah, it's rising and it's just escaping, okay. And it's rising, it's good to actually point this out. It is rising not because there's buoyancy on the fuel. As you can see that if you scroll down here, okay, there is no fuel buoyancy, but there is buoyancy on the temperature. And the temperature can push the fuel around. So that's something also to keep in mind. So for a plume like this one, no, I didn't close. Okay. For a plume like this, you want to have a lot of buoyancy on your temperature. Actually, more than your density, okay? You want the temperature to rise faster, and then that's going to push in the fuel, and it's going to push the density, and it's going to give you, I'm going to let this play. You can kind of see it, okay? So from like the internal bits seem to be pushing out the rest, okay? So you can see that sometimes you get like bursts of the temperature, and that tends to push the density around. And it's also going to push the fuel, so you get a reaction. That's what you get. You get temperature, and sometimes things burning up here, all the way up here. It's because of that. You get basically you end up with a cloud of fuel in the air, being pushed by the temperature. But in this case, it's just this is not that it's consuming itself. It's just simply the buoyancy of the temperature. I'm going to get rid of it. Here, rewind. Hit play again, and then here you will see there's no climbing anymore. So the fuel is not really burning at all. Not only because the ignition temperature is set to 1, it's because it's not releasing any heat. So how do you fix that? Well, you could, in this case, you can easily go into your sphere and make that a hotter. For example, if you need it, okay, a hotter, let's say a value of 5 on my heat. So now it's going to be a very hot ignition, so you could get a reaction on the base. Okay, you can see that it's starting to happen. The voxels are starting to disappear of the fuel, but that's it. It stops right there. It doesn't continue. Because from that point forward, in order for it to continue and keep burning all the way down, you're going to need to have temperature coming with it, which is not happening. Right now my temperature is concentrated in this section here. On the other hand, if you were to go in and then change your your heat release to a value, for example, of 2, you have to increase also the max temperature, okay, to a value of 2 or something higher, just to allow it. Then you're going to have a lot of heat being emitted from the fuel itself. So once it starts burning, okay, let's give it a chance. Then it will continue, and you might need to increase that a bit more because I can see that it's not really causing too much. Let's go ahead and increase that to a value of 5. And a value of 5, let's see what that does. Yeah, so it's happening slowly a bit more. We're going to have to crank up those values quite a bit, but it is reacting a bit better. But basically, that is the case. So you need to be careful. We're going to see it on the next example now, in the big shot. How much temperature you're emitting from the burning of this fuel versus from the one that comes from the emitter. It can get they add to each other, right? So you could end up with a lot more temperature than you need in this case. And these fluids can emit light. I never used this before. I used it probably once or twice, but not in production. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not fully. There's some conditions. It has to be done with mental ray, I think, and there's 1 or 2 things that need to happen for this to work. But this could emit light. Okay, it could light your scene. I could look into it. But today, honestly, I don't remember exactly what this does. But in production, you would never use that. You have your own different set of lights, or you will use something a bit more sophisticated than that, because it's a bit crap, the result. Perfect. So that is for this part. Let me just double check if you guys have any comments in here. Nothing. Right. Well, you know what to do with the questions if they come up. So let's go in and switch to the main shot then. Let's go, and I think this example, okay, by dealing with things in this way, is the easiest. Because if I start telling you about these attributes with the big plume, you're not going to see it that clearly. So this is a very easy way to describe it. Allows me to go into my main shot and just do things faster that way. So I got this geometry. I bought it from TurboSquipt. Okay, this tanks. The fact that I bought them means I cannot give them to you, but you could go into TurboSquid and they do have tanks, some sort of similar kind of looking tanks that you can go and get for free. I just got that because it came texture. I don't know, it was easier for me to buy it. So perfect, let's go ahead and set something up in here. So let's give ourselves some room and let's make a container. You see me doing this a few times. There's not much need for me to narrate it, but you know, I'm just placing my container to make it sit correctly in the scene. I'm going to use the ground, okay, the floor of this container as the floor for my entire scene. And here we go. So I'm going to need in here probably 40, if not more. All right, so something like that. Could be probably a bit too tall, but it's okay. I'm gonna leave it like that for now. And we are going to place it. I want to just, I'm pushing them to the right just to show you that you can use regular Maya fields for this. So perfect. I think I have a container. It's not too big, but I think it's gonna do the trick. Can give it a little bit more space. Okay, perfect. And I'm going to add an emitter. And here's the question that you'll probably have. Well, do I emit from the geometry or do I use another kind of emitter? I personally like to use volume emitters as much as possible. They have more control. Okay, I have all this a round axis, a long axis. Okay, you saw that on the Prometheus example. But also I tend to get a bit more definition out of those than just emitting from geometry only. But you could, it's up to you. I mean, I personally, given that this is a cylindrical container, I prefer to use a cylindrical volume emitter. But it's your choice. Plus, this geometry is combined. I will have to separate it. It's a bit of a pain, so I don't really want that. So for my example, my case, I'm going to grab this. You know what? This is way too tall. It's gonna bug me. That's better. You know how it is with the economy of the voxels, so I think this is going to be fine. Excellent. So let's go ahead and add an emitter. So create an emitter, and that should be fine. And I'm going to make it a cylinder. You don't need to bother too much with this. Okay. And scale it and place it where it's supposed to be. I'm going to do only one tank today. You can do the rest easier with more time. If you're not going to, I'm expecting to see at least, if you're going to use a different type of geometry, try to do at least 2 tanks, okay? You know how it is. The same thing that happened with the engines. The more, you want to keep in mind and get used to dealing with multiple emitters and, the accumulation of things that happen when you have them, So try to... if you're not going to get the same geometry that I have, try to use at least something that has a few more than one emitter involved. Perfect. So that should be, it's good enough for what I'm doing. And I put it into the wrong tank. I'm gonna do the first one so you get more room to move the density. Perfect. I think that's good enough for what we're doing. All right. So out of this emitter, okay, I'm going to need everything. So I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to be emitting density, heat, and fuel. I don't want any drop off. And this emitter is not moving, so I don't need motion streak. Turbulence is going to be very, very important. So I'm going to start with a value of something. I usually like to start putting just basic numbers, hit play once and see where I am, and then adjust it. So I'm going to put a bit of turbulence. And I don't care for velocity emission yet. I think the velocity, all the energy that I'm going to get on this reaction will come from just the buoyancies themselves and the swirl and everything. I don't think I'm going to need to help myself with that, but I could if I need. So that's another good reason, you see, to have a volume emitter, because you have the option, if you wanted, to do the speed emission and then use and around axis or something to give it even more turbulence, you know. So perfect, I think we got that. Let's go to the container, do our usual pre-flight check thing. Boundaries, okay, let's open everything but the floor. And let's make sure that we are simulating temperature and fuel. Easy enough. Then we'll do the usual stuff, dynamic simulation. We're gonna need a bit of damp. So I'm gonna start with something. High detail solving in all grids. Solver quality of 60. Resolution. This resolution is terrible, so let's go ahead and give us a ratio of, let's say, 2:1. Hide the voxels. Awesome. Let's keep going. Okay, I think that by this stage you have done fluids long enough to know that you're gonna need certain things no matter what. So density, for example, the buoyancy is fine. I'm gonna need some dissipation, so I'm gonna start with a value of 0.2. Velocity, I'm going to need swirl, and a lot of swirl in this case. I anticipate. I'm gonna start with a value of 4, but this will go high quickly. Turbulence inside the emitter for sure. Let's begin with a value of 0.1. It's like a recipe. And then I'm going to deal with this temperature and fuel in a second. I'm also going to need go down here into my lighting tab and enable self-shadowing. And I know, okay, and you should by now, when you have this kind of simulations, all right, you're going to need for sure to texture this container. Sometimes there is the question when you have just dust and simple volumetrics. There is a question: do you texture that or not? Can you get enough out of the simulation itself without helping with the texture? Could be, but in the case of combustion and reactions of this fire and things like that, there's no way around it. You're going to need it for sure. So it's best to go in right at the very beginning into the textures tab and then set your coordinate method to grid. Okay, just to get it simulated. And we can enable the incandescence, but we can do that part later. At least just enable the coordinate method so it gets calculated. And that's my basic, my starting point. Okay, I could even make a preset out of this and get a container that starts in this stage from this point forward on any simulation I make, because it seems like it's the standard for everything. Right, so let's take a look and see where we are. I'm going to save this scene just in case because I've done so many things already. I wouldn't want to begin from the start, so let's name this. Okay. And let's hit play and see what's going on in here. So if I sense that my simulation is a bit slow, I would like to be moving a bit faster for this class. So what I'll do, instead of reducing the resolution, because I have a ratio of 2:1, I'm just going to get rid of some voxels, make a container that is a bit tighter. It won't be good for you, but it's going to move for the class. It's going to be fine. You can make something a bit nicer at home. So I'm going to get rid of a little bit of this voxels, extra stuff. And in there. And a little bit of the high, just to get my simulation moving a bit faster. Because I need, remember, a ratio of 2:1 is not that much, so it's best to, I don't want to go into 1:1 or something that is not going to help. Let's move this down, and then I don't like these parented emitters under the container. Bit of a pain. There we go. Place that where it's supposed to go. Okay, so this should give me a bit faster result without losing the quality. It's a bit better, but I'm not too excited about the speed of this for the class, but let's see how it evolves. I'm going to hide my geometry for now so we can focus on the fluid itself, and I'm going to let it play as I keep talking. So first thing you notice is that you start getting oranges and yellows and red. Okay, it's starting to happen, and it's what I was saying earlier. It's simply because my incandescence ramp is now being put to a use. Before it was just mapped to the temperature. We didn't have temperature, so we got fluids that were just basically the color that you specified on your shading tab, that's what the color was. But right now we do have changes in color here, okay? And it's worth talking about that part quickly at the beginning, because they make it look like fire just to help you, because it's an assumption that you're going to be making some sort of fire with it, but it doesn't really mean much. All it means is the values of high temperature will pick this color, and values of low temperature will pick that color there. That's all. So this could be any variation you like. It can be blue fire, pink fire, green fire, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be, you know, it's just keep an eye that, in this case, temperature, high temperature to the right, low temperature to the left, and you will move through this ramp as those values change. So, but there you go. So we have something going on in here. Let's hit render and see where we are. This is one thing that you probably want to do from the beginning. Okay, you start rendering quickly, just simple test renders. Let's see what we get. Okay, so well, nothing fantastic yet. I don't want to render this geometry, so I'm just going to hide it for now. Excuse me. Okay, so you can kind of get an idea what's going on in here. So let's go ahead and change a few more numbers. First of all, let's push this thing to the right side. Okay, it's very simple. You grab your fluid and you're gonna just attach a field to it. In this case, I'm gonna use a uniform field. Do whatever you want with it. Okay, volume, shape, whatever it is you want to do. That's fine with me. Just to move it lightly, okay? Don't make it too strong, because it's gonna make the container a bit unstable. Okay, so let's see how we do it. And keep in mind also that, you know what, this resolution is killing me for now, so I'm gonna go low res first. So let's do a, well, I can get a 2:1 by just going down to 80. That's gonna help. I was gonna say that keep in mind that the buoyancy, okay, the amount of density you're gonna be emitting is going to compete with the uniform field. Okay, one is pointing up in Y, you're pushing, actually I haven't even changed the direction of this field, which I should, is pushing, should be pushing on the negative Z. So 0, -1. So now we're gonna get a bit of a push, but keep in mind that, right? So, you know, you're gonna have to be aware of that. And the more density you plan to emit is gonna start pushing this fluid up. All right, so we get something that is moving towards the right. That's good. It's moving a bit faster. We're still maintaining a 2:1 ratio, which is not good. I mean, not bad, I'm sorry. So let's deal with, I think this field is too strong. You can see that eventually this starts to happen. It starts to shoot in like a straight line. It's when the field is too strong for the size of the container, right? So I'll just play with my attenuation. I don't care much in this quick class, okay, about pushing this thing in the perfect angle. You can do it with more time, but you can see that they react to force fields. You just have to be very careful with the amount. All right, perfect. So let's continue. Things to change on the look of it, okay, just by the render that we did. There is no black smoke. No, there's no really, nothing is happening here with the temperature that it resembles anything dark of any kind, right? So we do have a lot of stuff going on, but it's not really, I don't see any black smoke. So let's go ahead and stop this. Stay on this frame, and let's go in and analyze, like I was saying earlier, what's going on inside this container. So let's go in and check out my density. Perfect, okay. So I do have density that looks okay to me. Let's see what the temperature is doing. So there's a lot of temperature in here. You can see that the density, okay, I'm sorry, it's darker than the density itself. So there's more value. There's a lot of temperature in the air going on in here. Let's see what's going on with my fuel. And my fuel is staying at the base of the emitter, which is fine, but I would probably want to have a bit of fuel at the top, okay? Just a little bit of pockets of fuel that kind of rise up in thinking and hoping that it's going to catch on with some temperature and then ignite in midair. That's going to make it look interesting. So let's go in and tweak a few of the values for the container itself first. Put this back to as rendered. The reason this looks so white is just because under the shading tab, and it's something you probably want to do right at the beginning, the color of the fluid, okay, is set to white, and that doesn't mean much. You can see it's mainly visible is the incandescence ramp, but this is like an overall tint on everything. So I like to go in and put this on like a dark gray, okay, value. It's a bit more realistic of what's actually going to happen. So that you can start to read a little better what's going on into the simulation. A little bit better. You can kind of, I don't know with the compression of the video, right? But you can kind of see a bit of yellow in here, a bit of orange. So something is going on. Next thing, probably, you can see that I'm starting first with attributes for the rendering of it, because I know that I'm going to have to change them. This ramp, for example, is not good enough for a detailed fire. Basically, what you need to do with time at home is just to go in and add different variations of color. So I will probably make this a bit hotter, okay? Maybe that's too much, but let's just pick a value in here, push it in there. Then let's pick a value somewhere there. Okay, I'm just basically giving this a bit of range. You can kind of start to see something. Keep an eye in here when I'm making those kind of changes, okay? Let's grab an orange somewhere there, bring it in. Let's pick, I'm just basically instead of having to retype colors, I'm just going in and reusing what I have. It's not very logical, but why not? Let's go in and try to fit in somewhere there, one of these. And you will go in and add as much as you want, okay? Add one of those, put it in there. And you will go in and work with this and basically bring your blacks in. And you can kind of see that it's starting to look like something better, okay? So black smoke starting to show up. Go in and play with this ramp, okay? And do these kind of changes. Basically, just what you want to do is this. You want to stop into a frame and analyze an image like that. And you can see that you get bright yellow, almost white on the base, and you go into have some oranges and dark reds all the way to black. You can kind of see the progression in here. That comes from this ramp. The temperature is going to rise, of course. From here, it's going to keep climbing. If you have fuel in midair and it's going to burn, you're going to have random pockets of temperature. And that's why you can see, even in these high bits, colors that are similar to the ones that I have on the base. And that's just due to fuel burning in midair. Okay, so sometimes you get a little bit of almost white on the top. That is just simply the temperature moving through this ramp. So, and you can also, you can push yourself a bit more by, playing with the input bias. To the left, you're cooling everything. Okay, you can see. To the right, you're making everything hotter and hotter and hotter until it's eventually just fire. No smoke anymore. It's just basically where you're sampling this ramp. Right now, like I said, you can sample only the smoke parts, or you can sample all the way to the top, which is completely burning out. This is going to help you fine-tune a little bit this later. So I'm going to keep it like that. And let's tweak a little bit the opacity. The opacity is something very, for a plume of smoke, like the one I'm doing, fire and smoke, is you don't need to do anything fancy with this curve. What I like to do is just like a bit of a slope. So basically, by lowering this value here, you can see that I'm consuming a bit of the edges. It is because they tend to be very round. Okay, so I can try to eat a little bit of the outside, and then I'll just go in and you can keep it as it is, a consistent opacity, or some people go in and just do like a little slope, just to get a softer, not so linear transition. It is up to you. Okay, you can go in and, but I don't see anything special. When we do fire next week, then it's going to be different. Okay, we're going to play with this, is going to play a bigger role. But right now, just give yourself something soft, and just remember that by dragging the slider from the left, you're eating the cool areas and leaving only the hot stuff, and then vice versa. Okay, if you go from here, from the opposite side. And you also have an input bias, so if you want to make everything lighter, you go this way. You want to thicken everything, you go that way. You can see how it changes the overall appearance. I haven't even touched any attributes of simulation or emission. It's only on the shading. Okay, so I'm going to sample probably this part over here. It's not ready yet, of course, nowhere near ready. But just by changing, I can see the potential on an image like this. I can see where this is going to go. And I'm going to show you without even touching much of the emission. So we got this. It still looks like crap. No worries. We're going to continue moving down, and I'm going to start texturing this right away. I'm going to take my incandescence, which is the one that I really care for at the moment. It's going to deal with my temperature, and I'm going to save this image. We could use the IPR. It takes 2 seconds, so why not? Let's use the IPR. So let's try that. Great. So this is with the texturing and without. Okay. And it's starting to take shape once you start cranking these numbers up. So a number of 4, you can see that automatically detail starts to come through. And it works exactly the same way as we did last week and the week before with the dust, where the higher the frequency, the bigger this flame will look. You can see this looks like a small little flame, like a messed up candle flame with some sort of black smoke, but it doesn't look like a tank of oil on fire. The moment I go in here and I take my frequency, okay, and I bump that up to 6, for example, you can see that it starts to take size. And it looks a lot nicer already. Even we have a crap resolution, 2:1. We haven't touched the emission. This already is picking up a good, decent look, okay? So go ahead and do your changes in here, do your magic. 4, okay, play with this however you like. If you want to make it even look bigger, go into 8. Wonderful. And put yourself a little expression in there as usual, just to give it a little bit of movement. Time divided by 2. Simple stuff. Hit create, done. So you can see that this picked up a very, it's looking like something now very quickly. You could do the same with the opacity. And give yourself a little bit of changes in opacity. Right now it's hard to tell because there's no lights in my scene. So let's go in and add a light or a couple of lights. So you can see that it works a little bit different. At least I like to do it this way. I like to set up my shading first a little bit. You have a simple, basic, quick simulation. And then I go in and fine tune my emission and you get everything done very quickly. So look through selected, let's go ahead and place our key light somewhere there. And we go ahead another one. To fill this then a little bit better. So from this side maybe, like that. And you know that we need shadows for this to look nice. So we're gonna have to, I'm only gonna cast shadows from the key light. In the shadows, because we're using Mentor Ray in this example, there need to be ray trace shadows. All right, so let's go back in there and take another render of this. The render that you see on the example that I'm giving you is done with RenderMan. Because it's faster, it looks nicer, but Mentor Ray will do a good job too. So. Okay. That's looking like something, but you can see that you had a lot of detail in these flames already down here, okay? It's just the transition is a bit crap, and that has to do with we haven't touched any numbers on the simulation yet, so. And we don't have much smoke, so we can go in, well, let's pick a few of the attributes for the simulation, I think, and then come back to the rendering. But the smoke, if you feel that it's not enough, you can always go in and sample a bit more. Let's see what we get. Okay. We need to adjust the exposure of our lights and everything, but we get in there. Perfect. I'm going to take my bounce light. It's as strong as my key, which doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to do half. And I'm also going to turn on, I'm still not done with the rendering side, I'm also going to turn on a little bit of my ambient brightness on the container itself. Just to give it a little bit of blue tint. So let's take a look. And I'm also, before we render that, I'm also going to increase my shadow opacity. I'm going to double it. I want to have very dark shadows in here. Perfect. Now we can try to render this. And it renders quickly. I'm just rendering, for some stupid reason, I'm rendering an HD frame, which I shouldn't be doing that. I'll lower in a minute. But at least, the fact that I'm doing that, you do get to see a bit more result, more detail on the recording. So It's not so bad. So perfect. We have a lot of interesting stuff going on in here. Now let's go and tweak a few things. On the container itself, let's go on now on the simulation part. I get the sense there's a question on the group. Aha. What elements push the temperature and fuel around in the container? What element push the temperature and fuel? Well, the temperature you're going to see now is being pushed by itself. It has its own buoyancy, separate from the density. The fuel gets pushed by density and by temperature. So you can use other forces, but basically the fuel is the only one that doesn't have its own buoyancy. So I'm going to come to that in a second. You will see. So a few things that I like to do then from the beginning. Okay, density, my buoyancy I think is fine. It's climbing fast enough. But my dissipation, although I don't want to dissipate the whole thing in front of the camera, I would like to have, and I think for that one it might be best to use the one with the environment. If I closed it. Oh no, it's right here. All right, so this one, okay, it's easier to see. So there is some dissipation going on the edges, okay? The big plume maintains its density pretty much throughout the entire time. But I do want to have a bit of dissipation quickly here. So this maintains that density because there's a lot of stuff going on, okay? There's a lot of density, a lot of heat being pushed. But if it reaches the edges, I would like to dissipate it. And that tends to always look interesting. If you have a lot of emission of density and you dissipate it quickly, it's always going to look interesting on a simulation. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to double what I have. You know that I'm not a big fan of diffusion, at least not on the density, so I'm not going to use it. I'm happy with what I have here. The velocity, okay, and the section of velocity, the swirl is going to be extremely important. You do want to you can see it clearly, especially at the beginning. I left the beginning visible like that just so you can see what's happening. So you can go in and you can see how these flames are rolling onto themselves, okay? So the swirl is very clear here. And it's happening later, okay? You can see every time something kind of goes into around the edges, you can see it rotating and swirling around. So don't be surprised if you end up using values like, hell, I don't know, 20, even more, 25. Okay, so that is perfectly valid. This simulation will be successful if you have a lot of chaotic motion on the base, because that's going to trickle all the way up through your simulation. So again, I keep coming back to this example, but here you can see that sometimes, okay, it looks more straight, and then you get like a random burst of stuff, like, you know, more density comes in or something, and it makes it, you know, behave different. So it's not like a cylindrical shape all the way up. Okay, it has different thickness, it has different, see, randomly you can get a sense of a big rush of something coming through. That is necessary. That's extremely important to get a good read. So swirl is extremely important, and the turbulence of the emitter is even more important probably. So swirl to a value of 20, that's good. The strength of my turbulence I think is fine. Let's see what else we need. I'm going to, on the temperature, okay, that's what you were asking, Keith. So what moves it, okay? You can see it has its own buoyancy. And the buoyancy of the temperature, like I was saying earlier, I like it to be a lot higher than the buoyancy for the density. I want the temperature to drive my density, pretty much, because it pushes the fuel as well. It's more realistic. So I usually go and put values that are very high. Okay, so I'm using 1, okay, for my density. I'm going to use, let's say, 8 for the temperature. I want the temperature to climb really quickly. Let's see what else we have. Dissipation, okay. I want this temperature. We can analyze what's going on in here, but remember, let's take a look quickly at the temperature. You can see that it's almost the same thickness, okay? You can see the opacity here and at the base. It's pretty consistent. It doesn't seem to be dissipating or very quickly. So I think I'm going to have to change that. I'm going to increase my dissipation on the temperature. So right now dissipation on the temperature is 0.1. Let's try 0.5. And in this case, okay, you heard me say many times that the diffusion on the density is not good. Don't use it. Diffusion on the temperature is a different story. You want this temperature to move freely throughout the container. don't have that obstacle and try, because the density dissipation, you want to avoid it because you want to keep pockets of density together. You don't want it to expand too much. But temperature, I want it to, I want it to move. I don't want it to get stuck in voxels and in compacting areas. So I want to diffuse it with no worries. I'm going to go into 1.5. Okay, I want this temperature to move quickly. Temperature turbulence, very, very important stuff. Like I said, you need chaotic motion. So the turbulence on the temperature itself is going to help. It's going to change the values of it a little bit, all right? So it's not only going to change the way it moves, but it's also, but because of the way it moves, it gets accumulated differently. So it will translate into a more random distribution of temperatures, not so uniform. And definitely important. So I'm going to go with a value of 6. And that is okay for my temperature section. I don't need to use noise or tension. That's not really necessary. On my fuel, we talked about it before. So the reaction speed is up to you. Okay, the first thing you should do is to take a look at what your fuel is doing. So it's stuck at the base. We're going to deal with the emission in a minute. But I would like to, let me just put this back as rendered. So you can see the fuel is just at the bottom. Back down to the fuel section. The reaction speed, then it seems to be fast enough because it's not really, if it was too slow, you will get a bit of more fuel in the air. So I think that's fine. But the ignition temperature is 0, and you remember that that's not a good thing. So we want to vary that to at least 0.1. Maximum temperature is fine to keep it at 1, but the heat release, I have enough temperature as it is. So I'm going to emit a little, but not too much. I'm just going to probably lower it to 0.5. So perfect. I got some numbers in here. I think we still need to go into the emitter and modify a few things. Right now I have the same amount of density, heat, and fuel coming in of each other, right? So I think we need to vary that a little bit. Keep in mind something, okay? We're on a ratio of 2 to 1. The one render that you see that I keep showing you in this class, I think it was 8 to 1. And you know what happens when you increase your voxel count, your dissipation gets stronger, okay? So you will end up with less density, less temperature. So I'm going to take account for that right away. So I'm going to go in and change my numbers to probably 20 for the density. And you will see why I'm going so high in a minute. The heat, I have plenty as it is, but again, like I'm going to add more voxels, so it's going to change. I think a value of 10 will do. And my fuel, I want a lot more. I don't have enough fuel in the tank. So I'm going to use a value of 6. And I'm going to add a lot of turbulence on the base. So I'm going to go really high. A value of 2 will be a good one. If we hit play right now, we're going to get a lot of shit. You can see, but you see it's changing a lot. You can start reading the colors clearly from the RAM that I was doing. It's going to be very buoyant. It's fine. We know that this is normal. You can see now, because there's a lot more density going through, the uniform field is not doing that much of a job. So this is fine. Okay, this is gonna, well, let's for the hell of it, let's hit render. I mean, it will look interesting, but it's not really there yet. Okay, we need to figure it out, a few more things. But the reason I'm going too high on those values is because I want to use textures to randomize the emission. Right now I have a very static, very consistent, the entire tank is all the time emitting everywhere density, fuel, and temperature. I don't really want that. I want to break it up with some sort of texture, and that is obviously, once you use textures, it's going to reduce the amount of stuff that you are emitting. So that's the reason. So I'm going to go in and plug a noise. And remember what I was saying, that the trick here is to have a lot of contrast in your colors, okay? So very clear definition between these two, and a low frequency, very low frequency helps. So let's try a frequency of 2. Because basically, I mean, in this case, I'm just mapping, I'm mapping this texture onto my emitter. So if I have a low frequency, I will get an area where it's burning, and big gap, another area. So it will be clearly visible throughout the simulation. Adjust a few numbers, the usual stuff, and I'm going to put a little expression on my noise time. Remember, move it slowly, because if you move it too quickly, it will mush up. It will just blend. If this texture is changing too quickly every frame, it's the same result as having no texture pretty much. And I'm going to use this texture now, not only for density, but I'm going to use the exact pattern on my heat. Okay, so those areas will emit in those two, but I'm going to emit my fuel from everywhere. This tank is full of gasoline or whatever it is. I want to keep it full of it. Okay, so I want to. You could use a different texture. You could use the same. If you use the same, that is very repetitive. Remember the deal, right? You want to have this fuel being pushed on by the temperature at different pace, different rate. So I think it's a good idea to emit fuel from everywhere and then just use density and heat with a texture. Cool, let's go ahead and rewind and run this one more time. I'm going to increase the strength of my uniform field now that we're going to be simming again. I'm going to reduce the attenuation. If you want to simulate faster, you know that you can always, like those of you taking RealFlow, in RealFlow you can disable the viewport. Here you cannot, but you can always disable the drawing of the fluid, and it's going to speed up. And while this cooks a little, let's go in here. Okay, I don't see any other questions. So Keith, is it clear? Did you get an answer to your question with what I said already? Yeah, all right, cool. Perfect, so let's see. Let's go back in here. So you can see that we already did 45 frames. It would have taken a lot longer if you draw the fluid. Okay, so we have this, which is okay. Now we need to go in and readjust a few things on the shading, okay? If you're happy with your emission, you can always verify it, like I said, by checking your density, which looks good. You know, it looks very interesting. So it has a nice property. Let's see what temperature is doing. Okay, so it's a very hot cloud, but it's not as hot as before. I can see that it's a bit more change in here. And let's see what the fuel is doing. Oof. Okay, so we need to fix this situation. A lot of fuel going on in here. So we need to make a decision. Do we emit less fuel or do we burn it faster? And if you look at the entire image, one thing that lacks, okay, is a lot of smoke in here. It lacks a bit more temperature. So I'll probably like to burn it quickly by going in and tweaking a tiny bit this thing. So let's say that the heat release is going to be equal to 1. Okay, so it's a lot more temperature. And the reaction speed, I'm going to increase it 10 times. So it burns faster. That's going to help me. It's going to burn quicker and it's going to release a bit more temperature in here. But I'm also going to go in and change my shading. Such a long list of attributes. Okay, my shading in here, I'm going to probably take my bias and shrink the cloud of smoke a little bit. Perfect. I'm going to add myself, now that we're coming to the end of the class, I'm going to add a little bit more resolution. So 3:1. Disable the viewport. Rewind. Let's save the scene in case something goes on. Hit play and let's go back in here and let's start doing the final round, and I'll show you a render at the end. So any order, any questions, anybody? Don't be shy. So everything clear? Claude, everything okay? I'm going to ask randomly. Dave, how you guys feeling? Cool. Yeah, exactly. If everybody tells me you're doing good, then I feel that I did my job. Perfect. All right. So let's see what that looks like. If there's still a few more minutes in the class, so if you think of something, please. I'm going to jump back in Maya and see what's going on. Like I said, I'll put the video up for reference, but you should be referencing to real life elements. But okay, so this did about 40 something frames. There we go. That's more like it. Okay, so this is looking interesting. Especially, I really dig when this kind of happens. It almost fakes like scattering, right? RenderMan will do a pretty good job with scattering light through volumes. So when you have temperature like that behind the dust, the smoke, it tends to light very nicely. So this looks good. I have a lot of chaotic motion in here. I would probably, if I were to run it again, okay, if you were to run again, try to play with your texture of the emission a bit more. just to see if you get a bit more breakup in here. But I think it's cool, especially what I like to look for in a cloud like that. It will be random. So it's not like this is probably too perfect of a round shape. So you probably want to break it up a little when it's thinner sometimes and it's thicker on the other. So this we're gonna need a bit more turbulence, and I probably will put a bit more swirl. I won't run the simulation again, but I'm just telling you that probably a value of 25 will do. And turbulence, I think this is fine. That's good. Let's just take a last peek at what the container is doing. So density, perfect. Temperature, we got a lot of temperature, so probably you guys, if you want to run it again, well, I think I like it because you saw the result, okay? So there's temperature behind the smoke. So I think it's good. You'll be surprised if you see one of those oil fires. It's impressive. The height that they reach and the fact that actually the flames, the temperature itself tends to climb like crazy, almost as high as the main plume. So that's not too far off. And my fuel is doing, that's something here we're going to have to, it's burning now too quickly. But it's fine. You'll tweak that yourself. Just keep in mind, you see how useful this debugging mode is. So perfect. And let's take a render and see what that does. And with that, we'll probably call it a day. The more resolution you start putting and the more temperature you start adding, you'll probably have to lower your texturing of the fluid. I think it's too high in my case. But let's see what that, obviously it's coming through. It's very hot on the base. But it's something that you can quickly modify. You can go down here. Because the texture, remember, is just multiplying the values of your container by an image, by a texture, right? So barely 4 is too much. You can try 2.5. Let's compare it. And it will look like there's less temperature overall. It takes the areas of high temperature and multiplies them by 4 and, to give more contrast. And so, something to keep in mind. But I think with this, you got the building blocks of what you need to do to generate something like that. Next week, we're going to take a variation of this one and do fire only. So save your containers, okay, this week. Perfect. Well, you get the idea. I think that gives the point across. One last second here. Would you recommend using auto resize? Auto resize, yeah. No, man. That's I completely forgot to talk about that at the beginning and why I hate it. Never use it, at least not in my course, man. No, I'm trying to be like a dictator or anything. It's just I'm telling you because I care for you. Auto resize is a beautiful concept, but it doesn't work in production. Big studios don't use it because it's a big problem to cache an auto resize container to a proprietary fluid format. Okay, I've seen the big studios I work. You've seen the places I worked on, and it's miserable how it fails. You try to cache a resizable container, and it's always a problem. Okay, the tools that they have, for some reason, it's a very unstable process. Okay, they're changing the amount of voxel every frame for the tools that they tend to have is not really efficient. So I've seen not you guys, I don't think I've seen you guys doing that, but some of the other guys in the community, they started using it from the beginning. And the problem is that you get used to it. And then you only know how to work with that, okay? Because it's almost like a shortcut, right? You can put more detail cheaper. And the moment they take that candy away from you in the company, then you start suffering because you have to, deal with the containers in a more let's say traditional way. That's why I like to show you how to get the most you can out of a static container. And if you work in a studio that it's a smaller pipeline, or they figured out why is a problem to use them, and they give you that choice, and you will get even a better resolution out of your container. So resizable container is no good, man. There's many issues. Not only that, but motion blur can be a problem. I've seen them fail pretty much everywhere. So at home, if you want to try yourself, okay, I'm not saying it doesn't work. It works at home. That's all. But if you want to try it. But try not to try it in this course yet. Get used to the harder simulations like this. Then, if you learn the hard way, then it's easier later, for sure. Good reference. Let's see. That's good. Let's see what kind of reference we have. Denied, man. I couldn't open it. What's up with that, man? What kind of clip you're sending? No, At least I cannot see it. Maybe I don't know. Well, but anyway, post that reference on the community. That's good. Like I was saying, try to reference to real events, of course. I'll put mine just for the hell of it. Perfect, guys. So I'm done. I'm gonna go to my next class. If there's no questions, then thank you. I'm gonna stop the recording. Thanks for you, those of you watching. Let me stop sharing, and I'll see you next week.